Hey, Lord of the Rings fans, your boy Knew Better Do Better back again with another episode of Voices of Arda. Yes, I know you saw the upgrades. I know you saw the upgrades on the channel,
Mhm.
especially over on YouTube, man. So just make sure you are telling everybody to like, share, and subscribe. We are also over on Spotify and we are on Google Podcasts and Apple Podcasts. So today we have a wonderful, wonderful guest. But before we get to our guest, we have to bow to the queen. Bow to the queen, who is Callie Cosplay and none other. What's up, Callie? What's going on?
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in for another episode. We have something very informative, I think, and it'll be very interesting for you today.
Absolutely. I agree. I concur.
All right.
So today we have a really, really well educated, well spoken scholar of a gentleman here with us.
Cool. Thank you guys so much for having me. This is so exciting. I've been wanting to do this for a long time. It's great to finally have the opportunity to sit down and have a chat. Yeah, my name is Erik Jampa Andersson. I am terrible at introducing myself. My I do a lot of very seemingly disconnected things, but I'm a Tolkien scholar, an environmental historian, and a Tibetologist, a
Oh,
Tibetan studies scholar. So I have sort of a
wow.
Learn something new
varied
every day.
background. Yeah, it's an unusual background and sort of an unusual trajectory into Tolkien studies, but that was the beginning. Tolkien came first before anything else in my sort of intellectual life. And over the past few years, I've been trying to sort of come back to it, and give it the space that I think it really deserves.
Mhm.
I'm a writer as well. I wrote a book, Unseen Beings: How We Forgot the World Is
Ooh.
More Than Human, in which I do
Hmm.
talk about Tolkien. He gets a chapter. I had to kind of twist my publisher's arms to allow me
Look, twist
dedicate a
that
whole
thing.
chapter. But because it's not a Tolkien book. I am working on a Tolkien book at the moment. Hopefully will actually come to fruition. But
Ooh.
I talk about Tolkien, but the book is more broadly about sort of the ideological roots of the Anthropocene and the climate crisis, and sort of looking at how we got here, why we got here, beyond just facts and figures, but actually looking at philosophy and worldview and the different sort of myths that have led us into the dumpster fire that we are currently in, but also some potentially sort of progressive steps to get out of it. And I think that myths and stories they hold a really important place in the human experience and in our sort of co-creation of our world. And myths can compel us to do some pretty shady things, and they can put us into
Mhm.
some really dark places.
It can't, but we
But they
can
can
do
also
wonderful things with it too,
we
can't
can
we?
do wonderful things.
We can
Okay,
do
thanks
look,
for
Exactly.
look. We can do some wonderful things. We can do some wonderful things. We'll circle back. We'll circle back to that.
Yeah, we'll circle back to that. That's where Tolkien comes in. That's
Yeah,
why he gets a chapter. It's like there are
that
good applications of myth
good
as well.
save. Good save with that one. We were headed for a dark and gloomy place, but we.
Exactly. I
Nah,
mean, this
good
is
joke.
something that Tolkien believed in. He believed in this really strongly. He was fully aware of the dangers of fantasy,
Yeah.
the danger of myth. He talks about this in On Fairy Stories, and in a number of other places. But as he quotes a Latin phrase, "Abusus non tollit usum," which is its abuses do not cancel out their use.
Absolutely.
So I think that's a good mantra to sort of hold on to in this time. It's like, yes, myth and lies can be used and are used to delude people and manipulate them, but stories can also guide us to a brighter future. They can help us recover a sense of what it means to be human, including in more than human world. So that's what a lot of my work is really focused on at this point, is the role of these stories and how we might be able to use stories to get into a better place. For
incredibly
social media stuff,
fascinating.
I'm at Erik Jampa everywhere. So if anyone wants to find me, I'm pretty
Yes.
easy to find at ErikJampa. I'm most active on TikTok, especially for Tolkien stuff. I'm on Instagram as well. Those are the main channels I use. I am planning on starting a YouTube channel in the new year, which is a daunting task that is
Mm-hmm.
slowly evolving. Also on Substack, easy to find anywhere. Erik
All
Jampa.
right. That is awesome. Well, before we even got done with the intro, you saw the level of scholarism. Is that a word?
I'll take it.
We'll take it. We'll take it. With Erik. So I've been literally chomping at the bit to talk to you. I know we had some conflicting schedules as I always do because I've been so busy, but I'm glad to finally get up here and talk with you. So as always, we have Kali steer us in a direction so we don't just go down some random road of just literally just chatting, because that's exactly what's going to happen. We're going to spiral out of control,
Yeah.
and we're gonna get into some great conversations. But yeah, Callie, look, I know we got some starter questions we want to ask my man right here. So
Yeah.
let's get into it.
Well, I myself might struggle to stay on topic this time because Erik just brought up just like six different forks in the road that we could definitely go down at any time, but we will try to stick to today's topic. Before I do, I have a question for you, gentlemen. What did the ring say to its therapist? I
Here we
feel
go.
empty inside.
Ah,
Okay, okay.
Okay. All
That's a
right.
good one.
So
I like that one.
New
That
Betta's been
one
off the hook for jokes for a little bit, so
went off the hook.
he had to have another one today. All right, so we just wrapped up season 2 of Rings of Power, and was it
mhm.
ever a season? Was it ever a ride? Holy moly.
My God.
And we had people everywhere saying, I mean, it just picked up, right? And people, fans and non-fans, were going, "Oh my gosh, do I like this a lot?" And that, of course, brings up the question of adaptations and how we receive them, how we see them, how we, accept them. And so we just finished Rings of Power season 2, and we are about to launch Roar the Rohirrim, which is going to be another very different adaptation, I think, from what we've seen in the Tolkien verse so far. So, Erik, do you want to start us off with your thoughts on, I guess, season 2 and how it went for you?
Yeah. I mean, I've been talking about this a lot on my channel. Obviously, I think all of us have been sort of forced to because there's been so much discourse about it on all sides. I've talked a bit about some of the dynamics that have emerged in the quote unquote fandom. I don't love the term fandom, but without having a suitable alternative, well, we can use it. But there have been these sort of factions that have emerged with very different approaches to it, and there's been a lot of infighting and disagreement amongst these groups. So I think a lot of us have found ourselves in sort of positions of needing to provide a bit of a balance. And I find that most of the Tolkien content creators and also most Tolkien scholars have a very nuanced sort of opinion of Rings of Power. And I believe we are also all probably going to have a very nuanced opinion of the War of the Rohirrim.
Mm.
Which is welcoming adaptation. It's welcoming novel innovation, especially with stories that we don't have a lot of detailed narrative information about. But also, hoping for a certain degree of faithfulness to the materials that we do have. But it's a sticky business. It's a dangerous business, Frodo, and we have to confront that. But Tolkien, I think, the way that I would sort of start talking about it, I suppose, is Tolkien set out to compose a body of myth that could be perceived and received and related to as a body of myth. And we have to realize that, like, in the modern commodified sort of capitalist world where stories are commodities, they're products, they're IP that's owned by a particular individual, and they're commodified by that person and their estate and related institutions in order to make a profit and so on. Our relationship with stories is very different from how they've been historically for, literally the vast majority of our existence as Homo sapiens. So we're talking, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of years.
Yeah.
Stories and myths, deep stories, using the word myth to mean stories about something important, which is one sort of popular, nutshell definition of myth. These sorts of stories have been things that organically evolve and grow and spread and take on a life of their own, and they become the sort of within the ownership of everyone that encounters them, that holds them, that receives them. Everyone relates to them in a different way, and storytellers will put their own spins on things and add new characters and take pieces out and recontextualize certain motifs and vignettes in the story. And that's how a myth grows and evolves, and it's how it becomes something that really has cultural power. It has social power. It has the ability to really impact the way that we live. And that's what he really wanted. He wasn't modeling it off of any one mythic tradition that, everyone loves to, not everyone, but a lot of folks love to say, like he was inspired by Arthurian legend, or he was inspired by Welsh mythology, or he was inspired by Greek mythology, or he was inspired by Norse mythology. And it's like, yes, he was inspired by all of them and
All of
more.
them.
I mean, they'd
No
still be
one of
partly
them.
right if they said that, I guess.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And but he certainly saw it as hopefully someday existing in somewhat of the same manner, being something that, people approach at different points in history and spin in different ways and relate to really dynamically. That's what he really wanted. He wanted it to be something that would, drawing out some of the tales in fullness and leaving others, placed in the scheme and sketched, and the cycle should be linked to a majestic whole and yet leave scope for other minds and hands wielding paint and music and drama. That's the letter 131 sort of statement that he made. That was his intent. And I think we're moving towards that, but it's complicated because of capitalism, because of the involvement of money and consumerism and its use as this sort of like IP that someone's using to make a lot of money. It makes it more complicated, but this was the goal. This was always the goal, even for things to be played with a little bit. This was really what Tolkien wanted. That said, I do think that first adaptations of particular stories have a bit of a different responsibility, and there is a necessity to faithfully represent the story as much as is possible, because this is the first time we're getting it in this medium, and it's the first time a lot of people are encountering it. So I think there is a responsibility on the part of adapters to retain as much of the sort of foundational elements of the story that they can, but we have to accept that there's going to be some wiggle room within that.
Yeah, that's also I agree. I know even though I'm a bit of a defender of the Rings of Power,
Yeah, same.
I I like to say, hey, I'd like things to, remain faithful to an extent. And so being that, we're talking about that and we're talking about the mythos, I think as long as the outlying arches of the story are held intact, we're fine. How we get there on the road, it always changes in from medium to medium. You know what I'm saying along the way. That's something that I'm a champion of. When I speak about Lord of the Rings now, I love the Lord of the Rings, but they definitely change how we got from A to Z in the actual film. So
Yeah,
that is
that's true.
something where I'm
Yep.
like, don't be a hypocrite. Don't be a hypocrite when speaking about one and speaking about the other. There is a incessant need for people to uh, hold on to things and claim them as their own and not want to share them and not want to you know um hey, this is for us type of situation where it's like but they don't think the vice versa when it comes to anything else in the world. When it's other people's myths or other people's what I'm saying, religions or cultures, you can dip in the well anytime you want to change things. You can put yourself as represented and their thing. But when it's something that you're like, you know what, this is really popular, this is really, really something that we can say is our own, then you kind of fight back the everybody else enjoying it and loving it, and that's just not realistic, and that's not realistic, that's not fair, that's not right, that's not I don't think what Tolkien intended. Now, the reason I say I don't think is because I don't know that man. I love his
Yeah.
works, but I can't speak to, what I'm saying, anything and say Tolkien would be rolling over his grave or Tolkien would feel this way or that way. I can say, hey, based upon his writing and what I get from it, I think he would probably agree with, everybody enjoying Tolkien, because literally that's what the story is about. All these
Yeah.
different races coming together and accomplishing a goal that they couldn't do by themselves. Also, the little guy overcoming, and there's a bunch of, obviously there's a million different themes there, but you know what I'm saying. So, just when we're speaking about the Rings of Power, I say as long as they connecting the overarching themes of what Tolkien wanted to do, and hey, good overcoming evil. You know what I'm saying. The feeling of being tricked, or coming, being in a hard place and having to change what you think is going to do as overcoming. What are we doing? I really love the last episode where you know Elrond and Gilgalad are standing there like, what are we doing? Playing defense or offense? And we see in the beginnings of when Elrond is like, hey, it ain't our part to play offense no more. That's not what we're, what I'm saying? So they incorporated that. Also, remember was saying, hey, it's not always strength, it's
Yeah.
light
Yeah.
that it overcomes. You know what I'm saying? And so we're seeing those themes. Now it might take us longer to get there and how they tell the story, but I think those themes are there. So that's why I'm a defender. Now, I would love for them to keep things much more, in a straight line and loreful. But I understand when they make changes, why they're making those changes. I don't forgive some, but if you can just get it in your mind, hey, why are they making these changes? Okay, does it benefit the story in this medium? Okay, I see what they're doing. Oh, they made the rings out of order. Why did they do that? Hmm. If which 90% of the people only read the book. I mean, only saw the movie, and even when they read the book, they don't read the
Yeah.
appendices. It goes in
Yeah.
verse order. It does not go in. It literally is a little tiny sentence in the book, in the appendices, that you would see that the rings are made out of order. Also, we know obviously from the Silmarillion, Unfinished Tales, so on and so forth, and different writings. Hey, the rings are made in this order. But if we watch the movie, which most people only watch the movie, the rings go in the verse order, and you would never know the difference unless
Yeah.
you're a scholar like us, and if you've been watching us, then I applaud you for championing that. But
Yeah.
understand what is going to get across better to the people, because people ask me all the time, "Oh wow, the three were made last? I thought they were made first."
Yeah.
Because if you
Yeah.
listen to what is said, you would think so.
Plus, if you
So
go according to the books, then you're also going to end up with all of these, essays in the craft, the draft rings,
yeah, a bunch of
and
stuff.
you're just gonna end up with people asking like, "What the hell
Yeah,
happened to the
where are
draft
those
rings?
rings?
Where
What's
did
what's going on there? So
Yeah.
Exactly.
um, it's been an interesting
Yeah.
it's been an interesting time last couple of months.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of people wake up and say, "Hey, no, this is actually good." We've seen the improvement that we all can tell the truth and say we see the improvement, and we see the stubbornness of people who just want to kind of like stay on task with their hate. That's not for me. Not to say you don't got you. Hey, if you don't like the show, I'm cool. Hey, I'm cool with that. I understand. You might be one of those people that say, "Hey, look, I needed to do this," and I'm cool with that. But if that's the case, just move on. And you know what? It's not for me, and move on. This whole we gotta hate everything is not for me. So that's my opinion on it. Even though it's very long-winded. But I enjoyed season two. What I'm saying? I know me and you, we've had conversations after we've done recaps and stuff like that. Or we've the episodes. We scratched our head in a few parts, like, oh, they changed that. It's a little weird, but that was a weird decision. But why did they make it? Okay, I understand it. Everybody's not gonna like it, but I get it. Did it work for the story? In the story, if we're just looking at the story as they're telling it works. So I'm cool with it, man. You know what I'm saying? I'm just enjoying uh the Lord of the Rings being brought to life screen and a representation of something that we never thought we were going to see.
Exactly.
Hmm.
I mean, I completely agree with all of that. There's a few things that I want to say about it. There's, on one point, I made a video which people responded fairly well to, just sort of like trying to create some sort of categories for the different approaches that we've seen and sort of responses to Rings of Power. There's the initial folks that hated it as soon as the first images were released, very obvious reasons,
Exactly.
and they are so far off the deep end that I don't really deal with them. When they pop up in my comment thread, I block them
Yeah,
immediately
right.
because those
Yeah.
aren't folks that
Hmm.
and I don't think they really belong in the
Yeah.
discourse. So putting them aside, I think there are sort of like major categories. There's folks that want a more conservative adaptation. I'm not using that term politically, but just in terms of
Small
an
C
adaptation which
conservatives.
is
Yeah.
very, very close to the text and takes few, if any,
Gotcha.
liberties. So a more liberal adaptation, which again, not political, but just in terms of being willing to make as many innovative changes as someone wants. And then there's the more sort of moderate approach. And I think it's important for us to know where we land in that. I'm a moderate. I'm okay with some innovation. I also want a certain degree degree of sort of faithfulness to the text, but I'm very much in the middle, and I'm open to some wiggle room, and I can understand both sides, to either side of me. What I also think is important is for folks to imagine or understand where the showrunners believe that they are, because there's this discourse, there's this rhetoric that the showrunners hate Tolkien, that they want to change Tolkien, that they think that his work is bad and therefore they want to make it better. There's all of this sort of mentality. I do not believe that for a moment, and anyone that I've heard who has spoken to the showrunners directly have said they love the material, they appreciate and respect the material, and they're trying to do it justice. I think they see themselves in the sort of moderate place. Whether or not we feel they've been effective at doing that is kind of beside the point. I want to at least give them the sort of respect and the benefit of the doubt to recognize that they perceive themselves as being in this middle ground, trying their best to keep that sort of balance. And I think that's a good place for them to be, especially with material that we have such little information out. The Numenor stuff is a different story. We have a lot of varying accounts of what happened in Numenor, but no one is going to be, pulling up the Drowning of Anadune or the Noshers or, the Lost Road excerpts or anything like that. We have limited information, but it's still more than what we have for the Forging of the Rings. And everyone keeps bringing in the damn essay from the end of the Silmarillion, the Rings of Power in the Third Age. That is a problematic essay in the internal historiography of the so-called canon. It's a complicated essay. It has inaccuracies in it. It was probably written internally by someone well to the Fourth Age, probably a human in Gondor, who didn't have direct knowledge of a lot of certain elements of that period of history. So it's just complicated when people are like, well, they need the Silmarillion to do this. Well, the hell they do. That will not help them, especially if you're just going off of that essay. So that's one thing. Another thing that I would say is, to your point, we don't know what Tolkien would have thought about this. We can make educated guesses about what he would think about certain things. But what I do know and feel confident saying is that he went out of his way to craft an ecumenical myth that can be approached from many different perspectives. It can be approached from folks from many different cultural traditions, many different linguistic backgrounds, many different religious views and ontological views. He created space for everyone to approach it and get something out of it because he allowed it to be in its own terms. He allowed it to be a self-contained myth that's not referring to something else. It's not an allegory for anything else. But in making it non-allegorical, made it perennially applicable. You can take that myth and you can apply it to countless, infinite different situations and contexts, and it can help shed light on what's going on. It can shed light on what it is to be human. And he went out of his way to do that, and it's obvious that he did that in many different ways, not least of all just being like the translation scheme. The fact that he put so much effort into figuring out ways to translate names and place names into other languages so that people reading it in French or in Swedish or in Spanish could understand and relate to the characters in a more intimate way. He really cared about that a lot. It was important to him that this was something that wasn't just for one group of people or people speaking one language or from one culture or one religion. He wanted it to be something that was applicable in many different contexts, just like real world myth often is. So that's another thing that I think is important. And a third thing that you mentioned is the difference in different mediums, and that's something that I'm really interested in with Tolkien's comments on fairy stories, because he talks about drama, which in this case could refer to stage drama or TV and film. And he was really skeptical of the ability for drama to be truly enchanting, for it to achieve the same ends that literature does. And he makes this argument in a few ways, and I don't disagree with him. I have an acting background. I used to do stage work. So I love drama. I love I appreciate the films. I appreciate the show. I appreciate having things that you can see, but it is a very different beast, isn't it? It's like you have an extra layer of conceit that you have to get through because you're watching Elijah Wood and Ian McKellen on your screen. You're not thinking, oh, I'm looking at Frodo Baggins and Gandalf. You're looking at Elijah Wood and Ian McKellen. You know that there's been all this film work. It's a set. That the music is just coming from somewhere. Like these. all that you can do is suspend your disbelief and try to enter into it. But what Tolkien gets at with his literary work, and what he argues that literature can do, is it's not just a suspension of disbelief, it's creating secondary belief. You can
Yeah.
actually have a direct entryway into that experience of enchantment. And it can open up so many different dimensions as well. He says in the essay, not much about a tree can be got into a play, something to that effect.
Hmm.
It's very difficult to represent the inner life of a tree on screen or with actors. Usually it ends up, if you try it, being really hokey. But in a book, you can get that immediately. It can go straight into your brain and you can imagine it and you can understand it. And it can allow for that sort of enchantment that goes beyond the human story. And yeah, I think his views on that are poignant because there's some truth in that. There was someone made some videos recently about the battle sequences in the Lord of the Rings, that
Hmm.
it's sort of one of the dangers of it is like, Tolkien writes about battles and he does not glorify battles. He makes
Mm-mm.
it very clear that this is
Devastating.
devastating.
Mm-hmm.
Devastating. Always.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, he knew, he obviously
Yeah.
had good experience of that.
Yeah.
But what happens when you show it on screen? What happens when you show it with heroes like Legolas skateboarding down a damn, staircase? What happens when you have these glorious moments, which are glorious, but it
Mm.
does by default glorify
It
battle.
does.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
It's like that's one of those things. Drama does something different than literature. It is a completely different medium, and
Yeah. I
there's
think
some
that
positive qualities and negative.
they're taking some things that are born out of necessity and making it cool. Whereas like Aragorn is fighting for his life, so we take Aragorn and Éomer and Helm's Deep, and they're fighting for their life, and it's so cool sounding. You're like, yeah, yeah, like or Hurin Thalion, and you know what I'm saying? He's like, yo, he fought. This is literally his last stand. He did not. This is not something. This is not a advantageous. This is not. He's like, yo, I'm doing this to be cool. Like it's like desperation. Like everyone is dead around me, but it's so heroic and so brave and it's so inspiring. You're like, wow. I'd love to see this on screen, this representation of this, and then it could be skewed, and it's like, yeah, war, no, no, no,
Exactly. No.
no, like the fall of Fingon, who I want to say real quick, and I wanted to make a video on this, who is probably one of the most underrated characters in the entire Legendarium. Fingon, sorry, Fingon. Is terrible. It's terrible, and his name is Fin. His name in itself is intrinsically cool. Fingon, the Valiant. They talk about his exploits. He's the first to repel Glaurung. He saved Mithros. He did all of these spectacular things, and he's super bold and brave. And the way he ends up is just like it's not it's kind of unbefitting for him compared
Mm,
to everybody else. Like it's like he went out like that, and it kind of shows you like it's as glorious as it sounds. This is not a game. This is not fun. It's
yeah.
a terrible thing that happens. They've lost their king now, and look how they describe his banner just in the mire of his blood. Like it's crazy how they talk about it. But I think that's a good example of the horrors of war. Like
Yeah.
somebody so valiant, so brave, so beautiful, so bold, and then look what happens to them. Look what happens to Hurin. Hurin's whole life is destroyed. You know what I'm saying? Of course, we get a happy ending with Aragorn, and everything like that. But look what happened to Boromir. You know what I'm saying? And Boromir is talked about and revered, even though we know as the reader, hey, something's gonna happen with him in the ring. Look at how the men of Gondor talk about and revere Boromir. Look from that perspective as if you're not the reader and you're in the story and you're like, yo, this dude is magnificent. Oh, the fall of it all. Oh man, this dark thing went over him. The fear he has, how as bold and brave as the fear is what actually got. He's so scared that he's going to lose his people, and that he drove him to connect with the ring and want it so bad, and that need. It's a horrible thing. It's a horrible thing. It's the nuclear arms race that we have going on. You know what I'm saying? Like our country is so great, so we don't want anything to overcome us or destroy. They have something. We got to use this something just as powerful, and just we got to do this. It's a terrible choice and decision. So with that being said, that I really dig what you just said there about that whole situation with Tolkien and war and what he means to be taken from his works. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? And how a medium can change completely what people perceive and how they understand it. So you know what I'm saying? So, as I think it's up to maybe people like us to try to, keep people on their toes and keep them in the perspective as to, what these things possibly mean or represent. You can enjoy them for what you enjoy. Everybody, as much as I hate legless skateboarding on the skate, it is
Yeah.
cool. It's cool.
Yeah,
It's
totally.
cool. I'll give you that. You know what I'm
Absolutely.
saying? It's like, oh, that's some cool shit. We get to
Yeah.
see the power of the elves and the smoothness of the elves and the, you know what I'm saying? But the context is everything. So, that's dope. One of the other things I really love when you talk about or when you get into the different understandings of the language itself with Tolkien and his intentions with the language and stuff like that. Like, somebody like me, I'm not great with language, as good as I am with Lord of the Rings. Understanding the different languages and all that stuff, it's something that's actually beyond me. I'm not great with languages, whether it's in real life or the Elven languages. But Tolkien actually making those languages and connecting them with other languages, whether it be Welsh or anything else. I'm always interested in learning about that so I can become better. Somebody like Silmarillion, are really versed in that well. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on his connection with the languages of the world and his creation of the language of the elves in particular, also the dwarves and how they impact the story.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, it's one of my favorite topics. It's interesting because Tolkien, it's like people know he was a linguist, and that's sort of the way that we think about him as, he was a linguist or he was a specialist in like Old English and things like that. He was a philologist, and that's one of those terms that it's become so like obscure in the modern world. So there's very few people who are like professional philologists, and very few folks go to university and do a degree in philology. But
Yeah.
philology is important, I think, for folks to understand, not even just Tolkien people, but just people living in the world today. It's important for us to understand what philology is. Philology is the study of the evolution of language, the interconnections between languages, and the ways that those also relate to linguistic and cultural groups and with stories and so on. It arose out of the discovery that initially that Indian languages and that European languages were linked, that there were
Mm.
connections between
Mhm.
them, that there were linguistic etymological similarities between them. And this, of course, was a consequence of this came about via colonization of India. So not a great context for it, but there was a this sort of like holy shit, like are you noticing that there's like these words, there's something about them that sounds familiar.
Very
And
similar.
yeah, exactly. And, after further investigation, there was the sort of discovery of Indo-European languages as a language family. This recognition that all of these languages, and there's many of them, there's hundreds of them overall, these are related to one another, which means they derive from a common ancestor. And if you can reconstruct the common ancestor by comparing the different languages, looking at how certain phonemes are related to others, how they seem to predictably evolve in very, sort of neat and tidy ways in this linguistic tradition. And in this one, it happened differently. And that leads us back to a common ancestor, which in this case is Proto-Indo-European, which was last spoken around 6,000 years ago,
Mhm.
probably somewhere around the Pontic-Caspian steppe. So all of the Indo-European languages that exist today are derived originally from Proto-Indo-European, but as they evolve, they took on, new little bits of information, new words from other languages that they were in relationship to. This was important because for a number of reasons. One, it gave us this recognition of how language evolves, and it's not just Indo-European languages. There's also Finno-Ugric languages that led to the development of, both Finnish and also like Sami languages and a number of other languages. So there's language families, and this is important, and it helps us dig into our prehistory beyond just written records or archaeological data. It allows us to really mine prehistoric stores of information and to learn a little bit about people that lived in the prehistoric era. So Tolkien was at the sort of forefront of this field. It had already been well established in the 19th century, but he was in an era where philology was a big deal, and it really it it was as impactful to the humanities as Darwinian evolution was to biology. That's
Yeah.
how absolutely world altering the discovery of philology was. So
Mhm.
Tolkien was very deeply involved in this. He didn't just know over a dozen languages. He also knew very, sort of in minute detail, the evolution of these languages and how they were interconnected. And also, more importantly, for him, he understood the intimate links between language and story, and also to the human mind. But language and story, that's really important. Stories are codified in language, and language is really a kind of exemplification of stories. If you look at like the etymology of a lot of words that we use every day, and it's like we don't think about the etymology very much, but when you really dig down and look at where a certain word comes from, you will find stories there. You will find mythic tropes and archetypes and links to maybe ancient divinities or ancient ideas about the nature of the world that are embedded in the language that we use. And he was fascinated by this. So his work as a philologist really informed his work as a storyteller. But it's one of those things. It's hard to sort of overemphasize how important his philological work really was. And unfortunately, he also philology got a bad rap in the 20th century because this was a discovery of linguistic and cultural groups. And for instance, Indo-Aryan languages and cultures. But we hear that word and it goes alarm bells for good reason, because philological data was exploited by fascist dictators in Europe in the 20th century to perpetuate racist ideologies and to transform cultural and linguistic groups into races, which they weren't. And philologists like Tolkien were sitting over there like, wait, you're misunderstanding the
Yeah.
data. This isn't what we're talking about. But it was in their best interest. They manipulated this information and turned it into this very different kind of story, which was centered around these races of people, which is absolute nonsense. There was never an Aryan race. There were Aryan languages, and Tolkien actually makes a comment about this in one of his letters. It's like, unless you're talking about a language group, this doesn't mean anything. So it's important. I think that link is important. But the way that that manifests in his storytelling is that language and story is very much coeval. It's a little bit overstated that he came up with languages first and then created the world to put the languages in. There's been a lot of discourse about this. John Garth,
Yeah.
his biography, really sort of upended that theory. Dimitri Fimi talks about it a lot as well. It seems that they sort of arose together. But story and language, these are intimately connected. And his languages are very unique in the sense that they are sort of living entities in the story. They are evolving in the story as well. They're interconnected. You can see all of the different philological connections between, Quenya and Sindarin, or with, Adunaic, or with Kuzdul, or, Valarin, and all of these other languages. You can see how they're connected, and you can see how evolutions in the language were accompanied by changes in, social and cultural norms, changes in worldview, historical events, new relations between different peoples. It's really very complete in a way that no one else's conlang, sort of
Exactly.
enterprises have ever been. There's a great book, Marilyn Fleer. It's called Splintered Light, Language and Logos in Tolkien's Mythology and Tolkien's World, something like that. But it's a brilliant, brilliant, brilliant book. I highly recommend it to everyone. It's hard to read at times, it's dense, but it's really profound. But she talks about this really essential trope, which also goes back to a point that you made earlier about it's not always strength that overcomes the darkness, but light. That was a very key part of Tolkien's mythos. And it's demonstrated literally. We literally have this splintering of light. We have, this sort of original, sort of primordial light. We have the pillars, which gives way to the trees, which gives way to the Silmarils, and also the sun and the moon. And we have this repeated sort of splintering of light that began as this sort of pure, essential light. But over time, with the manifold splinterings, it becomes this many rainbow hued light with many different, little bits shooting off, and it creates new possibilities and new colors. And that's exactly how language is as well. And it's his story really sort of follows this splintering of both light and language, viewing them as kind of two sides of the same coin, or two expressions of the same phenomenon, which is that, you might have this original original language or original light that's beautiful and powerful and sort of pure in and of itself. But through the splintering, you get new colors, you get new beauty, you get new nuances and new, forms of something that you would have never had before. And it kind of makes the picture more complete, even though it is splintered. It is a derivative of what was, sort of originally there. Um, but yeah, there's a lot I can say about that, but it's a really fascinating book, and that link between language and light is something that Tolkien was definitely himself very, focused on in a certain way, and you can see it directly in especially the early mythology. But yeah, Flieger's book talks about it, and it's yeah, incredible.
Yeah, like I wanted to just touch back on what you were talking about with the languages. Like they're so complete now, even though I'm not someone who knows how to speak the language and all of that, but they're not prop languages. They're not just like put there to just say, oh, in this there's a cool language that these people
Yeah,
speak. Like they literally inform the world, and you can see the connection between the languages, but also the differences, the effects of the real world consequences and the sundering of the languages. It is like, wow, this is like the real world. Like very much this, we can see similarities. We can see the differences between, like very similar to like how Portuguese and Spanish are very similar, but then we see differences and how the two people can understand each other, but they're still like, all right, slow down. Like it's really dope seeing those things in a book like that, to where it sucks you in and pulls you in. Now I'm much more of a map person, geographical person, and those things pull me into the story far more. But that tying those things all together is what makes this, like, it takes me out of the world. If somebody picks me up and puts me in the actual story, and I'm like, this is real life. This is absolutely real life, what I'm reading right now. And nobody can tell me any difference. Like, I can see his mind working to where these places aren't just, oh, there's a field there. Like every
yeah,
single place has a function. And particularly within the wars, they have function. The terrain is used, and it's like, I said this. Did you hear? Now, hey, they couldn't willy-nilly just come to this part. They had to figure out how to get around this or through this, or this thing defended this mountain pass. They can't just go through Dorthonian. It just didn't make any sense
yeah,
geographically. So I love that. I love, he's like, it doesn't work for them. They can take it over, but they can't use it to get into Balerion. It doesn't make any sense. They have to go around to the passes. They're actually held off here, so it doesn't matter that the Bragalag happened. You know, you know, Hiflum couldn't get overwhelmed because they got held back, but they couldn't get overwhelmed. There's mountains that protect Hiflum. The hills protected Dorthonion, but then they got overwhelmed. But it to no avail. We can't use that as a place to get into the Balerians itself. So
yeah,
what do? We overrun the places that make sense. Loftland and the Eastern Pass is the easiest to get through, and we overrun that. You know what I'm saying? So those things connect with me much greater. The rivers, how
right,
they're used. It's that is phenomenal, and the way he has a real world sense of everything, and
yeah,
he puts it into his writing, and this is why I enjoy it so much. It's fantasy and so on and so forth, but the way he ties it in with the real world, in the way he speaks, it ties it in. I always talk about the way he instills fear in his writing. It feels very real, very palpable, and it's like chilling and stuff. Like when he talks about it, it's just the way he words things. Even so, the name of the fall of Gondolin, he refers to that event as the fall of Gondolin. It feels weighted. It feels like, oh man, like, okay, so for this to be talked about in this mannerism, it had to have been great before you even know about it. It's the fact that he says the fall of Gondolin. You're like, well, why wouldn't he just say, oh yeah, that place got overrun? It was a place, you automatically are like, well, Gondolin had to have been great if he talks about it with such a way. It's so weighted. It was an event. It was like it happened, and it is recognized as this terrible thing. So what's up with Gondolin? Now I want to know. Now we see it was the longest lasting Noldorian kingdom, the strongest Noldorian kingdom. All these great heroes are there. one of the things I'd like to connect back to the language, which I really think is interesting, and I'm not sure it's kind of a headcanon, but we can do these headcanons with how he wrote it. So
Yeah.
one of the things is, if we remember from the writing, Gondolin is not the original name. And so the original name is in Quenya, and then they changed it to the Cinderin name. Now, is that because a big portion of the people of Gondolin are Cinderin, and Thingol outlawed Quenya? And they're like, hey, we can't speak this, we can't say this. So Turgon's like, you know what? We'll just call it Gondolin.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
that is really cool. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? They changed the name to that, and then it doesn't disrespect our Cinderin people who still fall under the sway of Thingol, and are subject to him. You know what I'm saying? Because you can't speak the language, so what are you gonna just say, the non-city? What are we saying?
Right.
So I just interesting things like that, which there might be nothing there. But the fact that it could be there and it is explained, and you can tie those things together if you wanted to, stuff like that, swords of worth, and what were they made for? Oh, where were they? Wow, this sword has this effect on these webs. Well, look where these spiders were in relation to where you are, and they did have a run-in with them. So did they have a run-in and say, hey, these spiders really gave us some problems. Let's make some weapons to deal with them. And then boom, after the fall, we get them taken, and now to be used, this thing to be used in Kirith Ungol in the Shelob's lair, and cut through with such ease. When Shelob is from the Dungortheb and near to the encircling mountains, and those spiders did have a run-in with the captains of Gondolin that escorted Arethel. What's going on here? Did you do that on purpose? Did you not? So it's just the way he drops bits of information, the way they can be tied together, whether they are or not, is really intriguing. It really glues me to Tolkien. It makes me obsessed. Amin Sul, just the name. One thing that they did in the film that I think is probably one of the best things I've ever seen is you have no clue about Amisul or Weathertop in the but Aragorn looks at it in size, and you feel it, and whether you know about Amisul or not, this must have been a great place.
Yeah.
And then when you learn the history and how much fighting was done over that Weather Hill and that particular site, and why it was so important, and the
Yeah.
Palantir that was there, and that it's actually the meeting point of all three broken, splintered
Yeah.
fraction points of Arnor. It's amazing. And then you look back and you're like, wow, that is
Yeah.
done really well. So I feel like Philippa and Fran and Peter had a really good understanding of the writing there, and that's where the medium the transfer works perfectly. You know what I'm saying?
Totally.
So I know it's just a bunch of scattered thoughts I just had there, but
No, great thoughts.
No,
All,
that's
yeah.
great. Because
literally the things that tie me to Tolkien.
Yeah.
Because Eric, I was wondering if you've spoken a lot, quite generally and with an overview about intent and impact. But I would love to know if you have anything more specific from any of the adaptations that have happened so far, where you feel that they made a change that either really detracted from Tolkien's intent for his works, or anything that really improved um what he was, the themes that he puts forth.
Oh, I have so many. I'm trying to think of what a good one would be to go with. I think Rings of Power is a little bit hard to approach in that sort of way because there has been so much novel innovation on the minutia, like on really specific narrative details. I agree that for me, it's more important that the general mm, sort of moral of the story, which I don't like to use that terminology in this case, but I want the essential bits to be retained, and I want the meaning to shine through as well as possible in the medium. But it's a little bit difficult with Rings of Power. I do have a lot of feels about a lot of things, some that I appreciate, some that I don't. I'm trying to think in the film trilogy, in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I mean, I really appreciate the recharacterization of Aragorn as a reluctant king. I think that's a pretty classic thing that I think most people like. I thought that that was a really powerful shift in that character, and it works very well. I have the classic, complaints about, taking out the scouring of the Shire. I understand why they would have done that, but I think that, it would have been valuable to keep that there. I think the heightened sort of discord between Sam and Frodo is a little bit difficult for me to swallow sometimes. Love Arwen, but sad that Glorfindel is just like gone.
Do we have any thoughts for so we've talked about a lot of past adaptations, but we have one coming up in December that will be very new and very novel for a lot of us. What are your guys' hopes and thoughts and predictions or any of that kind of stuff on the War of the Rohirrim that is coming up in
I'm
anime?
I'm interested to see what the responses are because I just like it's a page, it's 2 pages. It's this. It's it's and everyone knows, like people know it's that and 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 that and a little bit of that. That's what they got. That's what they
Okay.
got. That's it. So like if they want to like people are going crazy about Rings of Power and they like Peter Jackson should have done this. Peter Jackson understood he respects all blah 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 blah. Okay. I mean, I know he's not the director, but like, I want to see what the response is to this because we're going to be dealing with a very similar sort of situation where we have a little bit of information about what happened. We have very little actual narrative detail told through a character's perspective, which this is the thing that people have to, we just have to understand that like this isn't canon. There's been a lot of discourse about canon. I'm curious to hear what you think. And I saw that Corey also made a video, I think yesterday on this, and I haven't watched it yet, because he's the one that his comment about if they're not being canon in Tolkien sort of, set off of a whole sort of maelstrom of criticism. But I made some videos about this. I know that others have made some videos about this. I also, I think, wrote a Substack post about this. But it is indeed true that he did not write any of the legendarium materials as being authoritative, absolutely correct, canonical accounts of what precisely happened. Everything has its own internal historical context. And that is precisely one of the reasons why it reads so compellingly, why it feels so real, because it's composed to be a pseudo-historical account written from many different perspectives. You have varying accounts, some of which disagree with one another. You have
Hmm.
annals that give a long sort of, longue durée approach to history with just like, events by year. You have more narrative stories that are told through a character's perspective, but those had to be written by someone, sometimes by the character as an autobiographical account, sometimes not. And sometimes, folks made things up. Tolkien himself goes back, especially in like Myths Transformed in Morgoth's Ring, and looks at some of his other myths and says, like, that was a myth. That's a mannish myth, even within the legendarium. That wasn't actually what happened.
Yeah.
You have the Hobbit. You have the, first version of the Hobbit and the later version. He internally says, well, that was Bilbo lying. And then Frodo and Sam go back and they edit his work and so on.
Which I think is a genius.
It's brilliant. It's
It's
absolutely
ingenious.
brilliant. So to the point that you just made about like, things might not necessarily be connected, but they probably are. And that's history.
Yeah.
This is the difference between like, a story written from an omniscient third person perspective where
Mm.
everything that happens is precisely what happened versus a work of history and also our approach to
Mm.
history. We think of history as like the story of what happened. We think of history as being sort of like a series of connected events that are sort of a part of a story. That is a literary device. That's storytellers telling us the story of history. But in reality, that's not how the world works. There's
Mhm.
many interweaving, interconnected parts. Sometimes two things happen that have no relation to one another. But when looked at in the future, when we're looking into the past, we say, oh, of course those were connected. And usually they're connected to tell this story of the ascent of our wonderful civilization or
Mm.
this, it's always
Mm.
bound to happen. And it's really it's grasping at, sort of narrativizing the just what happens, narrativizing sort of phenomenology. And Tolkien is very similar in that respect, where he gives us a lot of historical accounts and we can craft a sort of narrative, a through line of it. But in reality, is there a through line? We could argue maybe yes, maybe no. Some things happen that aren't connected, but then they end up kind of becoming connected because of other circumstances. It's like history. And it's history in the sense not just the past, but writings about the past. And that's an important thing for people, I think, to know about Tolkien, is that the Legendarium is not Tolkien writing absolute truths about what happened as if he's an omniscient storyteller. It's him creating falsified, maybe, fictitious historical documents told from many different perspectives. And some of the stuff that's on the page did not happen. Some of the stuff on the page was believed to have happened by people in the Third Age about the First Age, but didn't actually happen in the First Age. Some of the thing, it's a complicated dynamic. But coming back to the War of the Rohirrim, we have a few pages of text, and none of it, very little of it, is written through the eyes of a character. We have very little dialogue. I think there's like maybe one line of dialogue that's actually given in it, a couple of lines, but very little work or material to go off of. And they're going to create a full film out of that. And they're going to probably tie it into other bits that come in other places. Obviously, Saruman is coming in, so it'll take us through to the point when he sort of gets involved. So it'll be interesting to see what they do. But I'm curious to see what the responses are, because I don't know. I don't want them
I've
to.
already seen some responses and I call bullshit on them.
Yeah,
I've
yeah,
seen some people who shall not be named literally like, yeah, this is what we should have been getting. Yeah, rah, rah. And I'm like, it's the same. They're doing the same thing. They have this much to work with and they're making up the rest. And you're completely fine with it. Bullshit. That's how I know it's just hate mongering. It's just oh, this is what is popular right now. Oh, this is mine, 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 mine. We don't want anybody else to touch this. When we know this is something familiar to us, that's recognized, that they didn't put these type of characters in this story. So, oh, I'm cool with this, and I'm going to tear this other thing apart. But they literally are doing the same things. They're doing the same things, which is fine. They both do not have full, complete stories. The only narrative story, or literally, is the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit. That is it. The rest are really coming from an overarching view.
Children
Even
of
the
Húrin.
Silmarillion. I'm sorry, what'd you say?
Children of Húrin.
Children of Húrin. The rest are coming from an overarching view. Much of the Silmarillion is literally a textbook type situation where they explain it. You're not even Calibeth. It's nobody's like, yeah, this person said, and then on Tuesday, when in the Lord of the Rings, they're literally like, yeah, Frodo ate this, and Frodo took a bath, and they tell you every freaking thing. You don't get that in anything else. So the mental gymnastics of being okay with one and then flipping out about the other when they're doing the same thing is super weird. But personally, for me, I think I'm fine with what they're going to do. I just want them to do it right from my perspective of how I look at how the Rohirrim acquire their land of Kalanarthon, and then what they do with the Dunlendings. Because as a person of color, you got to be very cognizant of real world things that happened in situations like this where we're like, good guys, Rohan. But remember, that does not make the Dunlendings bad. They were displaced, and then now they're having fights with these people, and we can't just forget that. Hey, what happened? They're giving away land that isn't. Gondor's giving away land that isn't theirs. That was never really fully theirs, and then they give it to Rohan, which is cool. It happened. Whatever. It's not necessarily Rohan's fault, but we got to be cognizant of what's going on with the Dunlendings. Did Helm handle this right? Did he handle this right? We can hail him as a hero because he punches people and it's cool to see as a man, raw. But did he do the right thing diplomatically? Could he have done something to not get his people killed and Rohan burned? Menasa was burned to the ground. You know what I'm saying? It's not like the Rohan is winning this thing here. They're losing most of it. And so is Wolf all the way wrong? You killed his dad, like, for just asking a question. What are we doing?
Yeah, exactly. Let's not glorify Helm Hammerhand. My God. Actually, to your question earlier, I would say that probably the thing that I have the most gripe about in the Rings of Power is specifically the chronology of the colonization of Middle-earth by the Númenóreans. To me, it's very important to acknowledge that the fall of Númenor did not happen overnight. It did not happen during the reign of Ar-Pharazôn. That was the end of it. But their fall was a slow process, and it was something that was really a direct result of their attempt to ascend to their little noontide of man and to claim, dominance over all of Arda. And that's really, it goes hand in hand with their desire for deathlessness. It's like their desire for world dominance and for deathlessness are very much interrelated. But this was a process that began centuries, depending on the timeline, millennia prior to Farazon's reign, prior to the time that we're in with the Rings of Power. And I'm not thrilled about that. I would like for them to show that a little bit more, because we're really getting this sense that it's like, oh, it's the King's men that are bad, and it's Farazon and Kemen that are, sort of the ones that are causing the problems. And before that, the Numenorians were all fine. It's like, no, they were struggling for a long
For a
time.
long time. So that's one of the things with the time jump that we do agree on, that, hey,
Yeah.
they're not showing this correctly, and
Yeah.
it matters. And this is something where it's like, should it be skipped over? Should there just at least be context to where we get why this is happening and the history of that? So that's one of the things I don't like about Rings of Power, is that their Numenor story isn't strong enough for me to get get that feeling. So I completely understand and agree with you.
I just don't want it to be just a story of, oh, Farazon decided because of Sauron. Blaming Sauron for it, I think, is problematic. And it's interesting because you see this dynamic between the three accounts of the Akalabaith. You have the fall of Numenor proper, which was the first one that he wrote while he was writing The Lost Road in the 30s. You have the drowning of Anadune, which came in the 40s, and you have the Akalabaith, which came about probably around the 50s, around the same time that he was finishing up the Lord of the Rings, writing the appendices and so on. And those three texts, those are three different accounts of the fall of Numenor internally. It's not that it was an early draft and then a later draft and a later draft. These texts exist in Middle-earth. Yeah. One was an Elvish account, one was a Mannish account, and one was a mixed Dunedainic account, possibly composed by Elendil himself, but based on two prior accounts, two prior documents. So these have different perspectives. But the sort of view that it was all Sauron's fault, that sort of emerges a little bit over time. Yeah. You get much more of a sense of the long history of Numenor's gradual descent into dominionism and, lunacy and hubris in other accounts. And that context really matters, I think, especially for us as humans living in the 21st century, where we are very much in a kind of Akalabaith Atalante kind of experience ourselves. The Anthropocene is very similar to that, and it's not something that happens overnight. It's not something that just began in the 50s or just began with the advent of modern technology. It didn't even just begin with the Industrial Revolution. It very much began 500 years ago with the colonization of native lands and the dispossession of resources and lands from indigenous peoples. It came from primitive accumulation of other people's stuff and using that to gain power and influence and wealth in Europe. These were important preconditions to the circumstances we're experiencing today. And I can't think of another fictional story or myth that really exemplifies that more brilliantly than the story of Numenor. And that's why I'm really glad the story is being told right now. I just wish that they would tap into that a little bit more cleanly, a little more directly. Even
hopefully
like the story of Elmont.
Yeah. Yeah, well, the story of that, and then to tie it back into the War of the Rohirrim, the story of Aldarion and what he does with the trees. I'm appreciative that Kemen in some fashion is talking about that, because that directly affects the Dunlendings as well. And then we're getting a people that are being constantly shit on, and then constantly, like, if you look at them in any representation of medium, beside the book, they're just like, yeah, those bad guys, those wild men. It's like, nah, chill. Like, like, give them, like, they're getting shit on their whole life. Like, they're just, you know what I mean? Not to say that, I want them to go kill and pillage the Rohirrim, but understanding is key. You know what I'm saying? So then when we have a situation like at the end of the Helm's Deep, where, Aragorn is like, you know what? Or Theoden and Aragorn are like, hey, we're not gonna kill you guys. And then they're like,
thanks.
Well, that's what we thought this whole time. Like, you know what I'm saying? And it means something. And then, Aragorn could look at him different. It always ties back to me with Faramir's words, or, damn, I wonder what they would have been doing if they hadn't been told these lies, or, not even necessarily lies in their case. just this
Yeah,
history that you've probably been getting told lies, and you're
yeah,
not, so that knowledge, as a reader is key for me. You know what I'm saying? So
totally.
I'm looking forward to the War of the Rohirrim. I do want to see the cool shit. I do want to see Helm
Yeah,
hammering people in the
absolutely.
snow, and it's awesome. I want to see Wolf, and I want to see his motivations and how he carries out his character. I want to see the connection with Orthanc finally, the keys given to them, because a lot of people don't know that Orthanc is at this time is literally like a satellite fortress that is actually not being held by the Gondorians, is being held by like a mixture of like people from Gondor that kind of been mixing with the Rohan people, and they kind of just like, it's kind of like up in the fray, like, you know what I mean? And the keys are kept with the steward. The keys are kept with the steward in Gondor. And then Saruman comes and he's like, "Hey, I'll watch this pass for you."
Yeah,
And all geographically, the Gap of Rohan is what guards west, west and east, and Eriador and Dunlin, all the way east. It guards Gondor there. Obviously Rohan, but that's their country. But remember Rohan's, promise, and it guards there. So if you get through that gap, so there's a very important reason that Orthanc is there, made of unbreakable stone, with the Palantir there, being able to reach out to the other Palantir, to the other fortresses, you know, Minas Ithil and Minas Anor, and of course Asciliath at the time, is destroyed, but before, when it's set up, you know what I'm saying? So I think it's really important. All those things connect together, and I want to see that. Even though 300 years prior, seeing those things that, hey, this is a singular story, has nothing to do with the War of the Ring, but it's going to have an
yeah,
effect on the War of the Ring. Saruman is going to get his tower at this time. It's very
yeah,
important. We're going to see the effects of the Corsairs of Umbar, the Easterlings joining and literally helping, and Wolf having the wherewithal to say, "Hey, we know what happens, if we attack Rohan. Gondor's going to come. So let's do this." And Sauron obviously knowing that, but using that same tactic later in the War of the Ring, in the adverse. He's like, "Okay, let's attack Rohan and get them out of the picture." And now Gondor will be by itself, and seeing what happens. It's really cool if you connect the dots. So
yeah,
I'm
absolutely.
looking forward to it. I can't wait. I can't wait to see Freloff. I
Yeah,
think I want to see how he handles what happens to his kingdom, and finally gets it back. I want to see Helm's sons, and you know uh, what happens to them is tragic, but the consequences of you know just doing things, and seeing how Helm deals with those consequences. And is it his grief that drives him to be the mad man of the snow, and the beast that he is? Um,
yeah,
but did he learn a lesson? You know what I'm saying? And how Hera is going to be played out in this whole situation, because the war essentially is fought over her.
yeah,
Not necessarily, if you look at it a certain way, hey, it was that very question, and the
yeah,
insult that Helm perceived it as. It's oh, really? And the racism in itself, and the inherent racism of, you lowly regular men, Dunlendis, you won't mix our blood.
yeah.
So that'll be really interesting. But I'm as long as they do it right, and they don't have to overstate it, but I want them to address it. I want them to address it, and just be cognizant of it. That's my thing.
Especially after it's been ignored so much. I mean, all of
Yes,
the opportunities to address this in the film trilogy were basically relinquished. Uh, the Dunlendings, but also the Woses. I mean, that's a big. I think it's a big oversight.
big
The
oversight.
fact that the Gonburigan's only request is that the Rohirrim stop hunting them like
Hunting them.
beasts. It's like, that's a very different take on our dear Rohirrim than
Mm-hmm.
what people come away with when they see the films. And
Exactly.
it has done a number on people's perceptions of Tolkien. It's like, you really have to have a very close reading of the text and go pretty, fairly relatively deep into it to get past that. But so many people, they just think that his story is strictly good versus
Good
evil, and
guy.
it's
Yeah. Yes, sir.
predetermined who's good and who's
Mm-hmm.
bad. It's based on where you're born, color of your skin, whether you're high men, middle men, low men, etc. It's like these are internal dynamics that these people came up with, which are themselves dangerous and destructive and prejudicial, and they are not good. Like we aren't idealizing those. There is a lot of gray in Tolkien's work. There are a lot, many gray areas. Morality is not something that's determined by where you're born and what group you're born into. It's what you
Mhm.
do. And he makes that
Mhm.
incredibly clear. But sometimes our heroes do really shady shit, and that really has to be acknowledged. If it's not, then
Mm.
you just get people walking away from Tolkien saying like, "Oh, I find him reductive." I find that he's just another one of those like old school, the Oxford Don, sort of like old stuffy white English, writers who just thinks that everything's about, good versus bad, and it's all, they think it's a race allegory and all of this shit. It's like, then you just didn't read that. Like, that's all. It's as simple as you didn't read the text, because there's so much more nuance that's in it. But my God, not presenting that on screen for one of the biggest film franchises in history that everyone knows, that's a pretty big oversight. I
Yeah.
think that's a really missed opportunity that's cheapened a lot of discourse. And now we get people saying things like, how dare they, have Adar and, the Uruks in Rings of Power? How dare they make them, redeemable? How dare they give them families? How dare we understand why they behave the way that they behaved? It's like, no, that was always the point.
It's always there.
It was always there.
It's literally in. It's so funny because it's in the writing with the orcs. Like you can see, like yo, they're not with the shits. They don't want to be a part of it. Like, and
Yeah.
it's part of the writing. Like it's a big part of the writing. They they
Yeah.
they have chapters where they're arguing and talking with each other. Like I don't even like you, dude. I don't want to be a
Yeah.
part of this. Like I don't. You don't like y'all. Like we're scared of these people, bro. And then
Yeah.
the Uruk-hai are literally like we're not scared like you. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? We with Saruman, we're not. You guys are scared. You don't even. And they're telling the other orcs like, yo, you're just scared. You're just like you're little scared little maggots. Like we're not like that. We're made differently. And it's like they're explaining it in itself.
Mm.
And like, did you just skip over that chapter? Did you skip over
Yeah.
the chapters in Kirith Ungol when they're arguing with each other? The orcs are like, yo, man, I'm not trying to be. You know what I'm saying? I'm trying to get my stuff and go on my own. The fact that they're deserters, there's people to watch for deserters, and the fact that that's how Frodo and Sam literally get across Gorgoroth is literally the whole point. It's like the orcs are not with the shits. They don't want to be a part of this.
Yeah.
So
Part of
it's
what makes
it's
Sauron
funny.
so contemptible. It's one of the, I think it's someone, he says something about it being one of the most egregious things that Sauron does. It's like he
Mm.
wasn't kind to his orcs. It's not that they were serving him out of love.
Yeah,
Mm.
This was Sauron, certainly very, very bad. And like, it's not just pure evil. It's a desire for order, and it's about the slippery slope that arises when you want to put everything into order and heal everything on your own terms and put
yeah.
yourself at the top of
Only
it.
his terms, and that
Only
leads
his
to
terms.
the
Exactly.
it
But like
leads to the
that's
cruelness.
yeah, exactly. Which is another pretty damn good lesson for humans today. Like we
It's like,
really desperately need that lesson. It's like, yeah, if you want to control everything and just like double down on control and fix everything by having more control and more dominance, probably not gonna end well. Probably
yeah.
not gonna end well. Like we probably don't, that's probably not the solution. We probably need, I don't know, selflessness, fellowship, love, companionship, compassion. It's
Antithesis of
like
these things.
crazy.
I'd love to know what you think about my Erendil theory that Erendil was the sword was made for him. Sting was made for him by Maeglin as a way to try to woo Idril, and it ended up backfiring on him. So when he grabbed Erendil and had him for hostage, he kind of like stabbed him with Sting in the leg or something, and that's the way Tuor was able to grab him and throw him over the Kadak door. And that's how Sting gets lost in the whole fray. But Maeglin is the creator of Sting as a gift to Erendil, and I think that would
Yeah.
be really cool. You know,
Let's chat.
I have a question for you. So I asked this question to every guest, and answer with anybody in the Legendarium that you see fit, the entire Legendarium. So if you could marry anyone from the Legendarium, who would you marry? Who would you have fight for you? Who would you have protect you? Who would you have fight for you? And who would you want to fight?
I might marry Beren. It might be
Okay.
Beren.
Mm. Good
Might be.
call. Mm.
I think, for many reasons. I mean, like, I feel like the obvious, there's other options, but,
That's
Ben, we're gonna go
brilliant.
with Ben.
Hmm.
Um,
Okay, okay.
Nothing else. He's
He's
my
gonna ride.
like plant-based king as well. Like we'll have great together. Like I think we have pretty like our ethics are pretty aligned. Like we're gonna have a good man. Like you could do worse. You could do worse, right? So
If
probably
anybody
Ben.
picks you up on horseback, he is going to do a renowned leap,
Yeah,
and he's going
100%,
to.
100%. Like you're
The
sorted.
leap. Yeah.
Yeah. So Ben is who I'd marry. Protect. I mean I'd say Gandalf because he's my guy, but he'd
Hmm.
probably just like leave midway through the fight. So that's like what he does. But also he has a direct line to the Eagles, so it's sort of like a two for one, right? So I feel like maybe
Hmm.
Gandalf. Um, I mean, if I'm keeping it in like the Bedouin family, then like I mean Huan, I mean a good dog
Yeah.
is
Juan is a great
Oh.
protector, man. You know what?
Hmm.
That is a
I mean,
great
maybe
answer.
one of the gods. I don't know. Ulmo would be good to have on your side. Okay, yeah, let's go with
Hmm.
Gandalf. Like, I want Gandalf and the Eagles, and I just like chill with Gandalf, and we could like have a nice time.
Good
As
plan.
far as fight, I mean, if I'm taking Baden, I expect I might have to fight Luthien, right? Like that's gonna happen.
Good luck
Like
with
she's gonna
that,
beat
man.
me up.
Wild answer.
She's going to beat me up. I'm
There
not
was
gonna
an answer.
survive.
I can't remember. Somebody said they were going to fight somebody. I can't remember, but it was wild. That might be on the same cusp of the
I don't want to
wildest.
fight Luthien. I do not want to fight Luthien, but I have a feeling if I'm gonna steal her man, then I'm gonna get my ass
No, you
handed
got to
to me.
do what you got to do. You got to catch these hands or catch
Yeah,
that voice.
yeah, that's what will happen. If I could just like drop in and like bitch slap someone and then leave, it'd probably be Feyenoord, if I'm being honest.
There
Like
you go.
I
Okay,
have so
yeah.
much of just like if I could choose, he would kill
I
me. Well. I'm gonna die in any of these situations, but Feyenoord,
Yeah, let's do it. Let's make it happen. That is awesome, man. That was a great answer. We always love hearing from different minds and different perspectives of who they would choose and the intricacies of like why. And
The
that's really
reasoning.
good
It's
for me
never the
because
answer itself, it's the reasons that we
it's the
love.
reasoning is always really cool. So thank you so much.
yeah.
All right, Callie, take us away.
All right, so it's been a while since we've done a regularly structured episode, but we always finish with a little self-care tip. So today it's on how to watch and love TV adaptations of beloved books. So first, I would invite you to read the book first. The book always gives you a deeper understandings of the character and the story. Number two, watch the on-screen adaptation, but accept that your vision of the book is yours. And no matter how thoroughly an author describes a setting or a character, even if it's 4 pages on one tree, what you see is not ever going to exactly match what somebody else sees, in their mind. So you need to separate what you've imagined the story to be from what you're actually going to see. It will be different. Accept it. When things are different, there's a mantra we use in meditation that is useful here. So allow the thought to enter your mind, acknowledge it, and then let it go. Just let it go. It's okay to notice things that are different or notice things that you didn't like or disagree with, but you don't have to like hold on to it tightly. Except that you are watching a new story. It might be similar to the one that you read. It might be completely different. It might add new dimensions, but it will not be the same story that played out in your head. Tip number five is to trust the storytellers. The people creating the show or the movie are now the authors. When you read the book, you trusted the author to tell you a good story. So now trust the actors, the directors, the writers, and everyone else involved in these adaptations to also tell you a good story. And tip number six is accept that you can enjoy both and differently, but you can enjoy both. It's very exciting, like especially over the last month, being able to talk about something new. I mean, there's only, the movies are getting old, and we can only watch them so many times and break them apart. So, I mean, so many ways, right? After
Prove
20 years.
it.
After 20 years, but to be able to talk about something fresh is really exciting, and I think that has really had caused a revival of the Tolkien community and got all of us talking about new things, which I really like. So hopefully we can keep doing that.
No, thank you very much, Cal. appreciate all the hard work you do putting this thing together. Erik, I want to thank you so much for being the guest on our podcast. Like I said, we want to have you back numerous times. So we're definitely going to continue these conversations, and I'm excited to continue in with the new reinvigorated channel, Voices of Arda. Make sure if you aren't already a member, you make sure you subscribe. Make sure you like, you share, you comment, and you pass this podcast around. But not only the podcast, but make sure the Voices of Arda YouTube channel is something that you are spreading around to your friends, because we have so many wonderful creators that we have now made a conglomerate now, a good conglomerate, we're not one of those bad business ones, but a good conglomerate of wonderful talking creators in a safe space to talk about talking, a positive place. And we have so many informative people who are here and are giving great interviews. They are giving great information, great lore, and just funny videos. We have all types of stuff going on, and this is a one-stop shop for talking. And like I said, it's a place of love. It's a place of friendship. So Voices of Arda, make sure you follow and you share our YouTube channel. All right. So until next time, I will see you guys later, as well as Kali. And big shout out to Erik Jampa Andersson. Thank you so much for being a guest, and we will see you
Yeah.
guys later. Peace.